I use headpiece templates to route the shape of my headpieces on my guitars. Once a template is made, it can be used to trace out the headpiece on the neck, cut it out reasonably close to the line on a bandsaw or by whatever means you have, and then when it's double face taped into position, it can be used with a router so that you can cut that headpiece to exactly the shape of your pattern. Now, if you're building one or two guitars, I suppose it doesn't really matter, but since I do a lot of them, I use these templates and I like the results I get. And it's also important that every time you build a different style of instrument or a different neck width, you may want to change the profile of your headpiece, or you may want to alter its size ever so slightly. A very large headpiece, for example, like this one, might look really out of place on a small bodied guitar like a double O or similar size, or worse yet, a parlor. So I have a lot of different templates for these purposes. And the other consideration is that this portion right here must match the zero end of the headpiece. And so lots of templates, at least for my purposes, come in very handy. I'd like to show you how to make one. It's not too difficult, and it's easy to make them perfectly symmetrical with the method that I use. The first thing you'll need is some pretty stiff, dense paper. This is Pattern Maker's paper that I've had for a number of years, but oak tag will work, or even thin cardboard from boxes and that sort of thing would work. So what I did first was I marked here exactly half of the width of the fingerboard at its zero end. And then up here, I drew another mark, a rough mark, at approximately the top of the headpiece, something a little beyond it. And then right here, I placed a mark that represents half of the width of the headpiece at its widest point. So now, it's really just a matter of sketching out whatever you want the headpiece to look like. So I'm left-handed, so things get a little weird for some of you folks watching, and I'm not going to be careful about this because I don't want to spend a lot of your time, but you're going to sketch this thing out until you get the shape that you want out of the deal. And let's just say it's something like that, okay? So now you're just going to cut that out with a knife. I've drawn a half pattern and I've cut it out with a knife. Now, I've drawn a half pattern. You may find it to your advantage to crease a piece of paper and draw the half pattern and cut it out and fold it open so that you can look at it very carefully, because it's deceiving when you make a half pattern. You think it's just right. You open it up, quite frequently you find that it's not right at all. There's something that you don't care for about it. So go through a few iterations before you invest your time in making the wood template itself. So now that I have this half pattern, it's really very simple. It's just a matter, and I hope you can see this on camera, my setup is not really perfect. But so it's obviously just a matter of tracing this out. Pardon the sound of my alarm, that tells me that somebody's in the driveway. So I'm just tracing this out. And it is true that the neater, the more precise your tracing, the better off you're going to be. I'm learning recently to use a 1/2 millimeter lead because it is very precise. Okay, and once you've got a nice definite mark, you're ready to cut it out. And we'll be doing that on a bandsaw. The piece is bandsawn to reasonable shape. I probably would have been better off to switch and use an 1/8 inch blade here, but in the interest of expedience, I didn't. You'll notice that I started with a thick piece of stock. This happens to be about 1 3/8 thick. You'll want something that's at least 1 1/8 inch thick, because you want to end up with a template that's 1/2 inch thick, so that you've got plenty of surface for the bearing and the router bit to run on. So now I'm going to take my sander here, my spindle sander, and I'm going to refine this. So the spindle sanding is now complete. What I want to point out here is, first, this edge that will become the center of the template, I forgot to mention, that needs to be dead flat and nice and smooth, because it's going to become a glue joint. And how specific, or should I say, how accurate you want to be with respect to shaping each one of these curves is up to you. The more you can refine them, the better, and I believe the closer you can come to hitting a bullseye in your target, the better off you are every time. But keep in mind that while this surface and these curves may be less critical, the absolute critical point is right here. This point must be exactly half the width of the fingerboard from this point. So now we have half of a headpiece. We're going to take some steps now to make it one headpiece. I've used a scrap piece of the same material to locate dead center with my bandsaw. By taking the piece of material, and you can measure all you want to, but an easy way to get perfect center is to slice in a short distance with your bandsaw, flip the piece 180 degrees and slice in again. If you're off center, it'll show immediately, and then you can make adjustments. To get these two pieces perfectly even is not critical, but again, the closer we can come in the long run, the better off we're going to be. So I've done that. So now all I need to do is take this headpiece half and split it. Now that I've split these two pieces, they're perfectly matched. But when I glue them together, I want to eliminate as much movement as possible. So I'm going to do a very simple trick. With the table saw, I'm going to cut a spline right down each one of these edges. And that's going to give me a chance to put those together and keep them lined up. I keep spline material around the shop all the time for this purpose. It's very handy to keep around. It's simple because the table saw blade cuts exactly 126 thousandths of an inch wide kerf. So I make this stuff up on the drum sander, keep it around, and now we're going to put these together. The only trick we have to worry about is we want to keep the same side of each piece against the fence. So here we go. It doesn't matter where I make the cut because it'll be in the same position on both pieces. And there's the two splined pieces. There's a piece of the spline material. It slips right in and it'll hold those in alignment. Now the only thing we have to worry about when we glue it up is making sure the pieces don't pass by each other. Well, it's time for assembly. I have my spline, I have my two halves, and I have my glue. I put the glue in a cup, and I'm going to use a brush because the way to keep these from spreading or moving beyond one another, passing each other, is, I think, to not use too much glue. Too much glue is just not a good thing. It lubricates the joint, things start to squeeze by each other, and it always happens, especially when you're not looking, and you get really embarrassing results. So I'm just painting a thin coat of glue on there, installing my spline, and I'm going to put more glue over the spline itself. Not too much. And I'm going to apply glue to the opposite side as well. Both surfaces, always a good idea. Okay, so now assembly is simple. We're just going to push those together. And I'm going to rub those back and forth just a little bit. Let some of that glue squeeze out what little there is. Now, I've heard it said that sometimes you should wait a minute or two to assemble these pieces because that'll eliminate slippage, but I don't have that much confidence in waiting. So I'm aligning these pieces carefully. Keep in mind that if they are not perfectly aligned here and here, the whole thing is a waste and you'll have to do it again. That's all. I'm choosing this type of clamp because it's one-handed. It's more than adequate pressure. And I'm drawing that right up nice and tight. And we're just going to let that cure. We got a little glue squeeze out here. Everything looks good. What we've got now is a perfectly symmetrical headpiece template. Just cut off the splines. As you saw, I drum sanded it. A little bit of judicious filing right there to get the spline down where it belongs. And there you have it. This can be double face tape to your neck. And you can use this to trace that shape out and then cut it out by hand or bandsaw, whatever you want, reasonably close to the line. And then you can route that out to the perfect shape. You can also drill your tuner holes in this before you split it open. That way they come out symmetrical as well. I don't, because I have different tuner positions depending on whether I decide to use mini tuners or full-size tuners or what have you. So there you have it. I hope this is helpful to some of you that are out there kind of beginning to make guitars, and maybe even if you've made 100 or 2 of them and you haven't thought of this, maybe it's helpful. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.